Okay, now I'd like to take a look at the application of the concept of paradigms to terrorism and trying to understand through various models. I'll start by looking at Rappaport's 2004 research looking at terrorism waves. And Rappaport analyzed the last 125 years, a very, very fascinating study. Basically, the first wave consists of the anarchists who basically committed terrorist acts by assassinating government officials. And this wave started around the 1880s and probably wrapped up around the 1920s or so. Following the anarchists, we saw the anti-colonial terrorism wave, which lasted a lengthy time until the 1960s. The third wave, Rappaport identifies as the New Left terrorists, which has been declining over the years. And the fourth wave is basically considered to be the religious terrorist wave. And Rappaport predicts that this religious terrorist wave may last until around 2025 and will be replaced with a new one. Now, this, of course, the question is, well, what would be the new one? I believe, and some other researchers as well, have looked at this concept of terror genocide. Terror genocide, which is kind of a combination of terrorism and genocide, basically. Some would argue that the concepts are very distinct, and others would argue that there are some similarities. Certainly, I think you could argue there's similarities and differences. And so this becomes a new concept to look at. And one thing I think that Rappaport does that relates to Thomas Kuhn's work and the paradigm, philosophy that I discussed in the previous video is that each wave has a dominant type, but it can be replaced by a new type of terrorist organization, especially when that organization decreases or fails or becomes unpopular and they cannot recruit new members to join. Now, Kaplan, in his 2007 work, believes that a fifth wave of terrorism, adding to Rappaport's work, is already here, and he refers to this as the new tribalism. And this is basically a utopian type of terrorism, which is an attempt to create a new world. And the example, interestingly enough, that Kaplan provides is a clear case of genocide, and that is the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia during the 1970s, where Pol Pot and his genocidal group killed thousands and thousands of citizens in trying to start the world anew. And if you, for example, take a course on genocide, you go into detail about the Cambodian genocide. But that whole idea is where the idea of terror genocide comes into play, basically. Some of the characteristics that Kaplan points out of this fifth wave, and again, we have to ask ourselves if these are occurring or not, and I think this leads to both qualitative and quantitative, numerical and rich detailed, quantitative being the numerical, qualitative being the rich detail of the cases, analysis. For example, Kaplan points out that there'll be a radical, break from the previous models that terrorists relied upon. And you'll see terrorist groups begin to isolate themselves or withdraw from their contemporary society. You may even see things, for example, as the concept of purity, a pure society or culture. And some would want to start, a new calendar, start fresh, basically. And you could also see internal or genocidal violence occurring. And you would also see the socialization of children and adolescents to this new model, trying to incorporate this model into the youth, so when they become young adults or adults, they believe this is the way of the world. The focus will probably be more local, and we will probably see a very authoritarian type of leadership style, some leader with charisma. And along with that, which will boost that authoritarianism and charismatic leadership, would be the whole notion of an apocalyptic violence theme. And so, obviously, Kaplan's work is extremely important and something that we should be studying in greater detail. Sedgwick, in the 2007 article, looked at inspirational factors of global terrorism waves and basically began to ask the question, how do some terrorist groups become successful and some fail? And of course, if you work in the area of terrorist prevention, this is an extremely relevant question. How do you deflate the power of a terrorist organization or group, or even better yet, how do you stop it from even forming in the beginning? And so Sedgwick points out that successful terrorist groups follow the patterns basically of other successful terrorist groups and avoid the patterns of terrorist groups who have declined or basically do not exist anymore as a terrorist or organization. And Sedgwick points out that while a radical type ideology or belief system is necessary, that the effectiveness of the terroristic techniques and the opportunities to engage in terrorism in a successful manner with support are major factors that are important to that terrorist group's strategy for success. And likewise, Sedgwick focuses on waves of terrorism, and Sedgwick has 4 waves: Italian, German, Chinese, and Afghan. And we could look at that in more detail if we were actually taking a course on terrorism. So I won't go into that now. And I use these models in my graduate class in law and social control, and I ask the questions. I ask my students to ask themselves what current laws regarding terrorism will be revoked, modified, and what new laws will be constructed. And so in that particular area, the legal system, and especially the international models that we're seeing developed, for example, the International Criminal Court, we ask, well, what changes are occurring? How can we, watch this, understand it, analyze it? And so I think that these researchers have brought us much closer to moving out of a narrow paradigm and trying to understand what's going on and analyzing ongoing changes as they occur, along with making some projections and predictions. And this wraps up this video.